very casual. It's going to be a really nice chat. Oh, here we are. I think we're on. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. This is our favourite Wednesday 8 p.m. segment. And Louise Candlish is here. It's not 8 p.m. for Louise, is it? What time is it in the UK?
It's 11 a.m. So very civilized.
There you go.
Yeah,
So
I'm on my second coffee.
This is the difference between the colour screens. I'm here in my phone, it's nighttime, and you're in your place and it's daytime.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody. This is our conversation with Louise Candlish. Now, you know how it works. You guys can jump online. You can ask Louise questions. I'll read them out and ask her. But before I do that, let me introduce Louise. Louise has been writing for some time, and we are up to, I think, book number 17. Louise Candlish is the Sunday Times and internationally best-selling author of 16 novels, and this is her 17th, as I just said. She's published all over the world. Her brand new psychological thriller, Our Holiday, which is what we're talking about today, is set amongst holiday homeowners on the English South Coast. It's out in Australia today. I'm not sure if any of you guys have read it, but you might have. The better reading communities are really good at getting their hands on preview copies, Louise. So it could be that they have read it. Okay, welcome everybody. Louise Gunn says hi, and a warm welcome to Louise. Sharon says hi. So this is your 17th novel. They are psychological thrillers. Is that how you started? Did you start with that genre? Talk to me about your first book.
No, I didn't start with that genre. And not only that, but I didn't know anything about genres and the labels that we apply to books. I think they existed in the market. My first book came out in 2004. But when I wrote it, it was around 2001, 2002. And I didn't really know anything about fiction publishing. My first book was a kind of comedy, I suppose, but a kind of dark comedy about a girl who stalks her ex-fiance to a little island in Sicily. And, it's very kind of, slight, hedonistic book with no subplots. It's quite simple compared to my complex books now. But I think if you read that and then you read my latest, you could sort of see that was an early work by the same author, because, my interest in the kind of, darker, subversive behaviors was there. It was just a lot more comic. And then gradually over the 17 books, which just sounds extraordinary to say out loud, I've gone through, various genres, I suppose, because I've done family sagas. A lot of my early books had an exotic setting. And then they gradually, I think probably as I grew older, because it's 20 years later now, this is my 20th anniversary as a published author.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And in that time, I've grown up from the party girl into a mum and a wife and a homeowner, and, thinking about life in a much more generational and, kind of vertical way, rather than just my peer group and all the things that matter to me in my late 20s and early 30s. So my writing has matured as well. And it's become, I think, much more, there's a lot more social commentary. It's much more layered. There's often the perspective of several different generations. And, from a structural point of view, it's, as I say, the books are much more complex. But ultimately, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I find this really interesting. We've also got a podcast, and I often talk to authors. And I do find, even when I'm reading a particular author, what happens if you start reading an author and then you just want everything they've written. You want to read everything they've written. You do see the maturity, in kind of topics. And because, we all know it's fiction, but fiction always has a bit of yourself in it. So you're probably more difficult to be writing. Well, not more difficult, but, to be 17 books down and writing about, young love is probably not where you want to be, right?
No, you're right. And I always say to people that, there are other authors in this position as well, but I think we're fairly unusual in that every word we've written has been published. So I didn't have any of those kind of false starts. The very first book I wrote was published. And so I feel like my, I've learned on the job, which means that, it's all there from the beginning. You could be, some kind of, creative writing tutor would be able to read my backlist and kind of see where I'd made breakthroughs. But for me, it's been purely instinctive because I've never been taught, or I've never even really thought about how I'm structuring things in a formal way. It's all just, but what's the best way to tell this story and to get these themes across and give these characters, a voice. So, yeah, it is a bit weird when I think about someone, if they read Our Holiday. A lot of people came to me through Our House, which was a big hit and then became a TV show. And so a lot of people thought that was my first book. And, I'm like, do you really think I was that good out of the blocks? Yeah. No way. That was like book 12 or something. But if they were to go back and read book 1 or 2, they'd be like, oh my God, she's it's quite a narrow world.
Like the Da Vinci Code, I think, was book 4.
Yes, yeah, quite often. Quite often a big hit will not be the first. And I like that because it means you really appreciate the success when it comes, because you've really paid your dues. And so that's how I felt when I started to be a bit more successful. I thought, okay, maybe I've earned this because I've had so many disappointments and I have learned my craft. And so now we reach number 17, and it's very much about what is interesting me about the way we live now, and how can I create a really tense and propulsive and entertaining story involving characters that get under your skin. So that's how I think about it.
All right, well, I'm going to say welcome to everybody that's joining us. Welcome to those at home. Here we are. We're with Louise Candlish. Louise is actually in London. I'm in Sydney, and you guys are all at home. The beauty of technology. Now, we do have a question, but before I ask that question, I want to ask you, when you became a writer, did you have a career previous to that, or you just...
Absolutely. Yeah, I worked from day one of coming out of university, where I'd done an English degree. I worked as a copywriter in advertising. That was my job before I wrote my first book.
It's not common, but I've heard that a number of times.
Yeah,
where copywriters have become writers.
Yes, I mean, you often find that writers have had some element of writing or content in their past lives. Journalism being, the most obvious. So many authors I meet were previously journalists or continue to juggle the two. So I was a copywriter, and before that, I was an editor in art nonfiction books, so illustrated art history books. And what else have I done? I worked on a travel magazine. That was my first job as an editorial secretary. Was my very first job, editorial assistant on British Airways magazines. So there's always been writing in my life, but there's a big difference between a copy line.
Why did you decide to write? Why did you decide to write, Louise? Why did you make that transition from copywriting to writing?
It's really hard to pinpoint the moment. I think I'd always thought that, because I was a huge reader and I'd grown up with books, and I was a big library user, and books were a big part of my life. Stories were a big part of my life. And I always thought, I'd like to do that. But, it seemed a bit hard. And, I was working full time, and I was partying and, doing all the stuff you do in your 20s. So I thought maybe I'll be like a Mary Wesley kind of person who starts writing their first novel when they're 65 or 70 or something like that. But when I did this trip to Sicily that inspired my first book, I was on my own for the first time in quite a long time. I was backpacking alone, and I just felt a bit bored and lonely, and was on, remote islands. And so I bought a notebook and a pen, and I just had the idea for my first novel, and I just started writing it, hand writing it. So it was, probably about 40 years earlier than I'd planned, but I'd always hoped that one day I would write fiction, but I wanted to wait until I had something to say. And I don't think I really had anything to say of interest until I was in my 30s.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Sharon Hill, and welcome to everybody at home. Cheryl Akle, Louise Candlish, and we're having a conversation. We would love to know if you've got any questions or comments for Louise. Sharon says, how do you choose your characters' names? That's an interesting question.
That is a great question, and you happen to have hit on the, one of my great frailties as a writer, because I find naming characters very hard, and I also have a kind of weird, kind of meaningless rule where I don't repeat character names, or I don't sort of knowingly repeat character names. And so by book 17, there's I've used up a lot of names already. So in our holiday, we have 6 narrators. So, looking at their names, there's Perry, Charlotte, Amy, Tate, and Robbie. So Perry, I think what I do now is, because I know that I find names hard, is if I see a good name, I'll make a note of it. So in a newspaper story, or, if I just hear someone calling their child by their name in the park or in a cafe, I'll think, oh, that's a good name. And or a celebrity name. Tate, I think, is a really good name. I like young people to have the more adventurous names, because they're much truer to the way, we name younger people. So the 20-somethings have cooler names, whereas my older characters will have more traditional names.
And do you have like an index of names over your books?
No. I always think if I have an intern, that will be a job that I will set them to.
Yes.
Yeah, because it would be quite handy. Maybe just little old-fashioned cards in a Rolodex with all the character names. I think I've probably had a Charlotte before. Charlotte's one of the main characters. She's the owner of the best house in Pine Ridge, which is where the book is set, this holiday home called Cliff View.
And tell us a little bit about the book. Tell us about our holiday.
Well, it starts with this very dramatic scene where in this beach resort of Pine Ridge, one of the narrators, Robbie, who's a local activist who's against holiday homeowners on the grounds that they're often left empty for much of the year. So he's
so topical, topical, isn't
really
it?
Cool.
Yeah.
And I did, I did a huge amount of research, and most of it's not on display, but I kind of really wanted proper knowledge to underpin the story, even though, believe me, there's no sort of great reams of politics, or, you're not being lectured in this book. It's pure entertainment. But in the first scene, Robbie, the activist, is at a beach festival. And he's lying in the dunes, and he's behind the stage. So basically the whole crowd is facing him, as well as the band on the stage. And behind the crowd is the headland, the cliff top where Charlotte and Perry's house, Cliff View, is, and various other houses owned by the wealthy Londoners, who they call DFLs, down from London. And right in front of Robbie's eyes, a house appears to sort of slide towards the edge of the cliff. And at first he thinks he's imagining it. And then he realizes it's actually happening. And when a song finishes, there's this sort of grinding mechanical noise, and this house tips off the cliff and smashes into the sea. And the festival's in chaos as everyone realizes what's happened. So that's how the book opens. And you then go back a few weeks to when all the characters arrive in the resort, and you gradually discover that there's an awful lot more to this mystery of the house falling off the cliff than meets the eye, and all kinds of crimes and misdemeanors among the cast of characters. It's quite a big cast of characters for me. There's 6 narrators is a lot for me, but it was kind of it's very layered story of entanglements among the down from Londons, or the blow-ins, or the summer people they get called, and then the locals who resent them.
It's interesting you talk about research, because I'm historical fiction, as you probably know, has had a surgence, if you like, and I speak to a lot of authors who spend so much time researching. But you wonder, you don't often think about the research that goes into fiction, or crime fiction, or, just regular fiction. You don't associate research with it. Whereas, I mean, I guess there has to be a certain amount. If you're writing about a a policeman, for instance, you need to have spoken to police. So how much time do you think you spend on research?
Well, I've got a confession here, which is that most of my research I don't do myself. My husband is a professional researcher, and so he does it for me. So we'll have probably 4 or 5 big sessions during the planning and the writing of the book, and I will tell him everything I need to know. And it might be something like, could you strangle someone with a dog lead? I asked him for this book, for instance. And this building that comes off the cliff, he spent days and days on that, discovering the how that could happen, what the maximum weight of the house would be, before it literally couldn't be pushed off by a JCB. All kinds of things, the tides, the time of the tides, sunset, the transport that gets them places, the whole holiday home issue. I read a lot about property anyway, because as you probably know, my books often have a property theme. So just for pleasure, I'm reading all the newspaper property stories anyway. So I've got a good background knowledge of the problems with the property crisis in the UK and internationally. But, some of the more detailed stuff he would research for me. So, yeah, I'm very, very lucky. And then he'll come and brief me on everything that I've asked for. And what I always say to him is it doesn't need to be likely. It just needs to be possible.
Yes, that's right.
Do you know what I mean? I don't.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, it's got to be logistically, physically plausible, but it doesn't have to be something that has ever taken place before. It just needs to be possible, and if it's possible, then I'll include it. But sometimes he'll come back and it'll be like, I don't think it would work that way. I actually don't think that they would die that way, or that there'll be cameras, so you can't do that. So we discuss it in quite a lot of detail.
So how long have you been collaborating?
Only the last few books, probably the last 3 years. So the last 3 books. He was really useful on my last book. Actually, there was probably more for him to do, because talking of historical fiction, The Only Suspect, which some of our colleagues might have read here today, that was partly set in the 90s, and so that is considered historical fiction now that we're in the 20s. Oh, wow. Even though to me it feels like yesterday.
Absolutely.
But what I found was that thanks to this party lifestyle I described earlier, I couldn't really remember many details from the 90s. I could remember the vibe. I could remember I could remember what I'd done, but I couldn't remember anything like, what time the tubes started, or what kind of trainers we used to wear, or, what music was out in the summer of 1995, what time the buses stopped running, all of those sorts of things. I will.
And do readers do know that?
My God, yeah.
I remember years ago now, I worked at Random House, very long time ago.
Oh, okay.
And this was a literary fiction book. And I can't remember the author's name, right? And it was set in London. He was an English author. And he talks about a character walking into a garden. Now, here, gardens aren't gated, right? But in the UK, they are, aren't they? They open and they close.
Yes, yeah.
Parks here aren't usually. And this character happens to, and I can't remember the exact detail, whether it was earlier or late. Well, it must have been later, because we got a handwritten note back then from a reader to say, well, that can't have happened because the gates close at 10 p.m. I mean,
okay. See, that's exactly the kind of thing that you don't want destroying your reader's experience.
Distraction for some people.
Yeah. So everything will be checked. And I find that kind of checking really tedious, which is why I've persuaded my husband to do it for me. But because I'm really into ideas, I really love writing dialogue. I want to get things going. I don't want to be kind of spending half a day discovering what time gates close in a park in a certain suburb.
Right.
But you do have to, because people do notice.
They
And
do.
and this is one of the reasons why I quite often will give my my places a fictitious name. They'll be based on somewhere real. So in our holiday, Pine Ridge, there's no such place as Pine Ridge, but I know that it's got elements of Studland, which is a village in Dorset, not far from Sandbanks, which is kind of our Miami beach, our kind of millionaires beach resort. And the characters take this sort of really cute chain ferry across this sort of narrow strip of water, and that does exist. So all the elements exist, but I just give them different names, and it kind of covers me a little bit for if I do make a mistake, because we're only human.
So you didn't do in your career trajectory, you didn't do a writing course, did you?
No, I've never done a writing course. No.
So you just went from copywriting to long form.
Yes, I'd done a little bit of travel writing, but don't forget I'd done a lot of reading, and I think that probably the vast majority of writers, of novelists, haven't done a creative writing course. In fact, I don't really think they existed when I started writing.
No, probably not.
I think there was one very famous one in the UK at UEA, the University of East Anglia, which had some really high profile novelist tutors. But I thought of that as for young students. I was in my 30s by then, and so it wouldn't have occurred to me to have done a course. But I think now, had I been starting out, I might have done, because I think they're really great for kind of motivation and keeping you going, and for that kind of discipline, and also the support among students, I think, can be really valuable. And I do know of authors who began on those courses, and they've kept in touch with the whole group, and several of them will have publishing deals, and they can kind of enjoy and navigate the experience of being a professional writer together. Because I know that I felt very alone, and I didn't know anything about the business when I started out. When I think about it now, I was so naive, but there weren't those structures. And so, if only for that, I think it's a great idea to do a course. And then if you get tips on how to create a fantastic story, then that's a bonus.
Well, it is, and often I hear authors talk about being part of a group, or a group of writers, and those things can be really motivating. I spoke to an author, I think it was only yesterday, who said she's been with her she's been with her writers group for 20 years when she started writing, and it's the same people that have grown. Some have been published, some haven't been published, but they're all still in that group, sharing stories and criticisms and all sorts of things.
I think that's so fantastic, because
isn't it? It is, because it's such an isolated job.
That's right. It's quite solitary, and this is the best bit, actually. When a book is coming out, and you get to talk about it, and you can tell how passionate I am about the characters. They've become my friends over the course of a year, and I can't wait to share them with everyone else. But most of the time it is quite solitary.
It is.
And so I think it's fantastic to have those groups that where we support each other. And the crime and thriller community, I have to say, is incredibly warm and inclusive and friendly. And we all get on incredibly well. And some of the big festivals that we have here in the UK, like Harrogate, it's thousands of people, and we all seem to know each other, and readers and bloggers and authors and editors and agents are all mixing together, and it's a really fantastic community. So
I find the same here.
Really,
fantastic. And often when you speak to one author, they'll talk about another author, and they'll talk about being friends with this author, that author, and also bringing up, I find a lot of and it probably happens in the UK, I find a lot of it more experienced authors like really mentoring younger authors, or talking to me about books that they've read by new authors. And I love to hear that. I think that's encouraging, because really it's not competition, is it? It's just there's a story for everyone. Now listen, we've just got a couple of comments here that have come through on Facebook. Christine says, good evening, Cheryl and Louise. Anne says hello. Juliet says hello. Welcome to our Facebook people. Now, we've got about 5 minutes left, so if anyone wants to ask Louise a question, please do. I want to ask, how does your writing day look like, and is it different now to what it was back then?
It is a little bit different. It's it's quite similar in that the number of hours I will write a day and the number of words I will produce a day or a week.
Right.
I tend to have a weekly goal. So most people will tell you that they want to do 1,000 words a day, and that's true of me as well. But I think of it in terms of 5,000 words a week.
Right.
And so I start probably at about 9:30.
Most days.
Yeah, most days when I'm writing.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm in a publicity and promotion mode at the moment, so I'm not really writing. So
That's why you're talking to us.
exactly. Yeah. So if I'm writing 9:30 till about 2:30, then I'll do a dog walk.
Yeah.
And then I'll come back and do another few hours, and then I'll have my evening free. But this is because my daughter is now grown up and at university. But when she was younger, everything was sort of structured around school runs and, you know, her schedule. So I still did the same number of hours, but I would often be working, you know, late in the evening after she'd gone to bed. You know, my husband was working full time then. And so I also had 2 dog walks to do. So when I look back now to how much I crammed into a day, you know, 10 years ago, say, or 15 years ago, you know, now feels very louche and relaxed by comparison. But ultimately, I don't seem to have used that extra time to create a sideline of, you know, books in another genre.
But I think you're going to apply that to everything.
Like, it's so true, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely
it's that law where you just fill the amount of time you're given.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I probably if I'm writing, I probably write for about 6 hours a day. But there's so much of the job, even when in writing mode, a lot of the job is, you know, the other stuff. So you know, the social media and meetings and you know, because I have quite a lot of input in my TV adaptations as well now, so there's quite a lot.
Have you enjoyed the TV?
Yeah, very much so. It's been really interesting.
It's just another medium of storytelling, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I've just started doing some screenwriting. Actually, one of my older books I'm adapting myself, but I'm also, you know, a consultant and executive producer on various others where there's a, you know, experienced screenwriter involved, and I'm learning so much. And I found that it's really fed into my thriller writing. You know, that kind of, you know, everything is dramatized, whereas on the page there's a lot of interior psychological stuff, which I love. It's made me really appreciate what you can do with a novel. Actually,
it's unbelievable, isn't it? And the amount of, I mean, I've never written anything, but when I look at screenplays sometimes, I think, is there enough words in that to tell a story? They're so sparse, aren't they? Because I guess so much is in the action. Now, we've got a couple of questions here, and I just want to ask you. Christine says, what is the most challenging part of writing a book?
I think for me at this stage, the most challenging part is always coming up with something, or putting the pressure on myself to come up with something new and original when I've already written so many things and tried so many different structures and explored so many different themes and characters. So it's that kind of seeking new material and, you know, reinventing the wheel. You know, I feel like each time I'm reinventing the wheel, and, you know, there are quite a few wheels in the past now, and I'm still looking to see how I can redesign it and how many spokes it will have and how fast it will turn. Keep it fresh. Yeah. So that is hard, but that's also the exhilarating bit. So as with many enjoyable jobs, I think the challenge is what makes it enjoyable. But there's definitely pressure, and, you know, and now that, you know, we're in a world where you get instant feedback for your work, you know, I'm all too aware of the response to the stories, and so I know which characters are popular and which characters are hated, and I know where someone thinks, oh wow, you know, that I was really surprised by that, and when someone will say, predicted it from page 1, you know, it's all there, you know, churning in the background, and so the pressure to produce really high quality work, I think, seems to increase every time.
Because the readers are more discerning as well, I think.
Yeah.
Juliet says, do you think about your characters after you finish writing, like what they'd be doing in a certain situation? I do that even with reading.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's in a way, that's what tells me who my favorite characters are and which ones I've put the most of me into. So with Our Holiday, the one I'm thinking about all the time is Perry. He's one of the narrators. He's he's this real kind of arrogant ex-city finance guy. He's got quite a few problems and issues, and as we discover, he's also running a double life, a sort of secret life. And there's quite a lot of me in him, which may sound odd because he's the love to hate middle-aged guy, but I think about him all the time, and I think about where I would take him next, and maybe he will reappear in another book. So yes, absolutely, great question, and I'd be really surprised if there was a writer who didn't carry on a relationship with their characters, long afterwards.
Or a reader even.
Same. Totally.
Okay, Jessica says, hi, Louise and Cheryl. I love your books, Louise, and I'm looking forward to reading your new book, Our Holiday.
Thank you.
And this is our last question, and it's from Christine, and she says, what authors do you like to read? I think that's a really good one to end on. Good question.
Absolutely. My favorite authors are Tom Wolfe.
Yes.
Even though he's not a crime writer, obviously, I think, he's just one of the greatest writers of all time. That whole sort of gonzo style, really getting in the heads of the characters, crazy, vibrant situations, fantastic set pieces. So he's my ultimate writer. In terms of crime influences, I always go back to Patricia Highsmith. I love Barbara Vine. I'm quite late to Barbara Vine, actually. But I think those Ruth Rendell books in Barbara Vine's name are absolute masterpieces, especially A Dark Adapted Eye and Fatal Inversion. Who else? Obviously, the Golden Age favorites like Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie was probably the first author I binge read when I was about 12. And again, I find that's very common with authors of my age and thriller writers of my kind of vintage. Back in the day, Agatha in the 70s and 80s, Agatha Christie was, still enormously current and everywhere, in every library, in every bookshop. So yes, Agatha Christie. And then I love reading my contemporary thriller writers as well. All the favorites that you'll love as well, like Lisa Jewell and Ruth Ware and Claire McIntosh. And
we're so lucky, aren't we?
Yeah, I think we're in a bit of a golden age, actually.
Yes,
and dare I say it, particularly for female authors. Yeah,
I agree. Louise, we're out of time. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of you at home. I don't know if you're on Facebook, but if you are, go and have a look at all the comments. They're still coming through now. Colleen says, Louise, you'll have to start reading Australian crime authors as well.
Oh yes, Jane Harper's another one I love. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy your day in London, and thank you everyone for joining us. We have this such wonderful, vibrant community that just loves to chat with authors.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been brilliant.